Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Nate Elliott, and it's great to have you with us for another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and martech. AI platforms are changing how consumers discover brands, how they compare products, and how they make decisions. And today, we'll discuss how you can understand the ways in which AI platforms describe your brand, which sources shape those responses, and what you as a marketer can do to improve your visibility and your brand perception. I'm joined now by my guest from Bluefish, Charles Aubert, lead consumer AI engineer. Charles, welcome.
Thank you, Nate. I'm excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you here. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind our audience that we want to hear from you. So you can use the chat window to the right to tell us where you're joining from. You can use it throughout today's session to ask questions and to engage with your peers. And don't forget to answer today's poll question, which you can find in the Resources tab. We'd love your input, and we will be sharing the results of that poll a little bit later on. But to kick things off, Charles has brought some of Bluefish's latest data on AI and visibility. Charles?
Thank you, Nate. We're really excited to be here. And today, before we get into the conversation, which I'm really excited about, we wanted to take a moment to share some of the latest insights from our State of Enterprise Brands in AI. One of the key questions for CMOs is understanding how is AI portraying their brand. This is what I do every day at Bluefish. I spend my days helping the largest brands in the world with their AI marketing effort. From brands that are just starting on their journey and they're trying to get an understanding of how AI is talking about their brand, to the most mature, globally scaled programs with some of the largest brands in the world. For those who are early in their journey, today we're really excited to share some of these early insights from our report. You will be able to see a much more in-depth version of these insights inside of the report. But hopefully these are catalysts to your AI marketing journey as they answer some of the top questions that CMOs have. Before we unpack some of these insights over the next couple of minutes, I did want to set some of the context. If we look in the past, there have been major shifts in discovery channels that have required brands to rebuild their brand and marketing strategies. This is something that marketers are used to. That was the case for search, mobile, social. But what truly differentiates AI is that it's impacting every vertical and every marketing team. Every channel is now converging under AI all at once. What that means for brands is that this new ambassador that is talking about your brand to your consumers is pulling from an entire ecosystem of information and will find every narrative about your brand out there. What we've done over the past couple of weeks is we've actually compiled an extensive data set that tracked close to 200 brands across 5 categories, 9 verticals, and 5 performance dimensions against which we evaluated every brand. This report will help you kickstart your AI marketing journey as it answers some of the strategic questions that CMOs have when they're starting on this journey. Which brands are winning in my vertical? Who's actually in the driver's seat about my narrative? Who's describing my brand? And then most importantly, the insights are just the beginning. It's about optimizing. So finding where there are opportunity areas across topics, across verticals, and across the source layer. This is what we will be unpacking in the next couple minutes. At a high level, before we get into some of our findings, I do want to talk about how brands should evaluate success and how this channel is fundamentally different. What we're seeing across the millions of prompts that Bluefish sends every day is that being visible isn't sufficient enough. And as you can see here on this slide, the brands that are the most visible in their own vertical might not be the most favorably represented. This is a major shift for brands. What that means is, while in traditional search, the blue link didn't carry any meaning or any narrative, in the generative world, the answer is the narrative about your brand. So appearing only secures a spot, but it doesn't secure a positive appearance. That directly leads us into our first finding. And this is something that my team sees consistently across our customer base on a daily basis. AI rewards topic ownership. What that means is the brands that secure long-term performance are the brands that are the most visible and the most favorably represented. And that across topics that LLMs prioritize. This is a brand new ambassador. It's a new salesperson that is using a different sales pitch or a different sales playbook than the one you'd like it to use. And what that means is it's actually leveraging different topics than what you would want to evaluate your brand against. And therefore, the brands that manage to satisfy and produce authority across the topics that the models value will perform the best. As I mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, winning in a vertical takes more than visibility. And this is something that is stark when you look at each vertical. For example, in the apparels retailer, we see that the most visible retailers are not the most favorably represented. Evaluating your performance is much more complex than visibility. You need to think about position. You need to think about how crowded the answer is. How many other brands are there? How high or low am I? But you also need to be thinking about the narrative. Am I being portrayed for one of the examples or one of the bad examples in the vertical? And also how accurately the AI models are representing your brand. What that means for brands is that they need to rethink their strategy and the way that they're optimizing for the AI marketing performance. This is the case also as we get into our second finding. The insights that I just shared are a sneak peek into aggregate performance. But we as marketers have always been waiting for that channel that delivers on the promise of personalization. This is exactly what AI delivers. Each answer is unique to who's asking the question. And what that means for a brand is that if your narrative is not consistent across your customer segments, your performance will vary greatly. And the AI models reflect that. In this example, we see a retailer with really strong performance across certain customer segments, but much poorer performance on another. What that means is aggregate performance insights are not enough as you think about taking action. You need to measure at the audience level so that you can understand what are the performance drivers for each of those customer segments and optimize accordingly. This consistency is not a North Star. It can be built, and this is what AI models reward. What that means is once your narrative is consistent, the models will see you more consistently and will reward that. And this is what we see in some verticals, in this example in telecommunication, where some brands are able to achieve that consistency, both in visibility as well as favorability across their audience segments. Now, the two previous findings were really the result of performance. How are the models describing my brand, my vertical, who's winning? But the reality is the web is in the driver's seat. And the AI models are actually pulling from a very different ecosystem of sources, depending on the vertical that you're in. What that means is AI models are going to see your narrative or lack thereof across the entire marketing ecosystem. Think about how the mix is going to change from one category to the other. In retail, e-commerce might be more important than in pharma, where we might see governmental or official sources playing a bigger role. In telecommunication, we actually see owned content playing a major role. This all impacts your AI marketing strategy as you're thinking about optimizing. You want to be optimizing for the sources that are actually driving the narrative and influencing your brand performance. That leads us to probably the most common question that we hear from CMOs. How do we actually move the needle? How do I build a durable advantage in AI? Well, as I mentioned, it starts at the audience level. measuring with granularity. There's no such thing as aggregate performance in the AI channel. Your performance is unique to a category, unique to an audience, and unique to a product level. This is the type of intelligence and granularity that you need as you're making optimizations, because there are no generic optimizations there again. You will need to be optimizing for the sources that are driving their narrative the most, the sources that are being favored by the models for a specific audience segment. If you don't have that intelligence, you will not be able to optimize effectively. And finally, these insights and optimizations are half the battle for large organizations. When we work with the largest companies in the world, one of the biggest hurdle that they will find is that their marketing structure or organization was never built to unify all of these teams across one goal. This is what AI is pulling from your social media strategy, your PR strategy, your affiliate marketing strategy, your paid media strategy, your own content. And all of these teams need to start working together to unify the narrative and deploy consistent shared optimizations to move the needle. This is a major shift that brands were never prepared for and that Bluefish helps its customers with. I hope that these couple insights were helpful into getting the conversation started and helping the brands here on the call today and actually understanding what it takes to first understand how AI models are describing your brand, but how it's really only the beginning of that journey and where they need to think to actually go and optimize their performance. Nate, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Charles. That was fantastic. I definitely learned a lot. And one of the things that I loved about your presentation was that message towards the end that becoming visible in AI isn't just a job for an AI team, it's a job for a huge percentage of the organization, for the web team, for the social team, and for a lot of other folks. I've got questions I'm going to get through and ask you
Awesome.
on my own, but I also want to remind our audience, if they haven't taken the poll, go ahead and take it. And if you have questions that you'd like Charles to answer, go ahead and pop those in the chat on the right of your screen as well. We will be getting to audience questions in just a few minutes. But I want to start with this one because it was perhaps the most notable thing to me. In almost all the verticals in your study, it looks like the leader for visibility and the leader for favorability were different brands. If I'm not mistaken, Target is the only brand in the study where they win for both visibility and favorability. So I'm curious, what is it that Target is doing that some of these other brands aren't doing? And is it something our audience today can learn from, or is it just something about the Target brand that, that happens to work for both of those variables?
Yeah, this is a really great question that we get every day from all of our customers. The reality for explaining Target's performance goes back to what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. Think of this AI model as a new brand ambassador. That new ambassador has a specific set of criterias that it's prioritizing as it's recommending brands inside of a specific vertical. What that means is it's going to favor brands that actually deliver on these topics. And this is what we see with Target. They were able to be visible for those most important topics, but the content that they expose actually satisfies what the models are looking for. And when you look at the sources that are being cited in that vertical, Target is actually part of the top 10 sources, meaning that the content they're putting out there resonates with what this brand ambassador is looking for. And therefore, as a brand, they're simply more in control of the narrative in the AI channel because they're surfacing what models are looking for. So think of it as Target being in the driver's seat relative to other brands where their performance is actually left to third-party content. So social media, Reddit, and we all know that the brands are not necessarily portrayed the most positively in those sources. So this is what explains when visibility leaders might be, present in many of these third-party sources, but the narrative might not be the most positive one.
Yeah. Let's take that thinking a step further because I love this notion that that's one of the reasons Target's visibility is so high. But another thing I took from your presentation is that visibility on its own is not enough to be a category leader in AI. So beyond owning the content, owning the conversation, and generating that visibility, what else should brands be focusing on to make sure they're actually driving business value from the channel?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And obviously, as we're all coming from the world of traditional search, where again, that blue link didn't carry any meaning, any narrative about the brand beyond maybe the URL title. And the reality now is that narrative is the answer. And so, as I mentioned before, securing a spot in the answer is just the first step. But are you securing a spot because the AI is using you as an example to illustrate something wrong about the category? Or is it using you as a great example for that category? And again, it comes down to understanding the sentiment towards your brand. And that sentiment comes directly where the AI models are pulling from. If Reddit or social media is driving the narrative in the category, obviously most of the brands are not in the driver's seat. And therefore, the more you're mentioned in those channels, the more visible you're going to be. But if it's for the wrong reasons, you secure negative sentiment around it. And that's a huge brand risk. One of the other things that we work on with our brands that is unique in this market is accuracy. I think as users, we've all experienced a model hallucination. But the reality is that is a real revenue risk. As you try to capture users in the upper funnel by securing visibility, positive sentiment, as you move towards the lower part of the funnel, if the model starts hallucinating about your brand, whether it's about the price, about performance aspects, if you think about electronic devices, battery capacity, camera, these are the hallucinations and risks that are going to deter customers from actually buying your products or considering your brand. So again, think of it as being visible is the first step. Securing a positive sentiment is the second most important, and AI accuracy above all to make sure that the models are describing your brand in an accurate way.
It's a great point, the question about accuracy, because one of the things we know is that large language models, by definition, won't ever stop hallucinating. I mean, the model providers are trying as best they can to reduce those hallucination numbers as low as they can. But OpenAI themselves, in the last 6 or so months, acknowledged, meaningful double-digit percentages of product-related responses contained inaccurate information about those products. I mean, I couldn't agree more with your take, Charles, that it's an incredibly important thing for CMOs. But you think it's actually more important than favorability and visibility showing up at all?
Correct. Obviously, being in the answer is the first part, otherwise, you will never be considered. But the reality is, when a model hallucinates, and that again goes back to where is it getting the content from? If the only information that the model has about your brand is coming from social media, from third-party content, these sources are probably not the most trusted. And this is what the model is directly going to reflect. And the reality is, again, as you spend all of that effort into securing the position, securing a positive sentiment about your brand, what we see is if a consumer asks a question specifically about a device, about your product, they're really low in the funnel. They're considering your brand. But if the model hallucinates, it's not a visibility issue. It's not a sentiment issue. Is the price widely different? Is the performance or the specifications about the device inaccurate? And these are the factors that consumers consider before they make a decision. And this is where you switch from, are we securing a position, to are we securing the revenue that could come from this channel?
All right. Getting back to visibility for a second, it struck me when you showed the data from Costco that for some audiences, the presence data was incredibly high, like 84%, I think it was. And for other audiences, it was below 10%. I mean, that's an enormous range of possible outcomes depending on which audience we're talking to. The reality, I assume, is that there's an average we can get to, but the average doesn't actually describe any individual person. And the experience is just incredibly different for different groups of people. So what does that mean to a brand? What do I do with that information? How do I know which of those audiences I can best influence my results for and where I put my effort in when I try to generate this AI visibility?
Yeah, this is a really great question. This is really one of the most common misconception that we see across, this space. It's a very noisy category. There's a lot of new players in the space that are delivering those aggregate insights. Hey, this is how you're doing in this particular category without considering the audience segments. Again, if we get back to that concept of the AI model acting as a brand ambassador, is it's actually leveraging everything that it knows about a particular user or audience segment to actually understand how it's going to make that personalized recommendation. And that personalization happens throughout the process that the model takes to build that answer. So it also happens when it's pulling sources and pulling content from sources. Is it matching what I'm trying to deliver for this particular audience segment? So the implications are plentiful for brands. The first one is obviously your aggregate performance is only reflective of an actual performance as long as you're measuring it from the audience segments that you're trying to capture. One of the worst thing you could do is measure performance generically, and therefore you're perhaps not even looking at a customer base that you're trying to target. And so you might actually start spending dollars, marketing dollars that you're reallocating to optimize for an audience that is not yours. Or on the flip side of that, you might actually miss that you're not performing well from one of your core audience segment. And so a competitor might actually start owning that niche. And because you're looking at the data at such a high level, you're never able to capture it. As you think about optimization, this is the granularity that's required to deliver those effective optimizations. Because there is no such thing as a generic answer, there is no such thing as a generic optimization. You need to understand how the model is speaking to each of your customer segments, where it's pulling content from for each of those customer segments. And these are going to be individual strategies that the marketing teams are going to have to go after to improve performance. This is what we mean by granular insights informing effective optimizations.
Right. If I understood your data correctly, it looks like favorability of a brand in AI is steadier or more evergreen than visibility. And how positively an AI describes you tends to be true for longer than whether or not it's mentioning you at all. I'm curious what that means in terms of, well, number one, does it mean it's harder to change or takes longer to change favorability than it does visibility? And I'm just curious from a brand's perspective, how does that change the tactics that I should be focusing on?
Yeah, this is a really great question getting into the weeds of optimizations and strategies. The reality is, again, visibility depends on am I mentioned? And it's pretty easy to get content to actually mention you more. And so to actually drive more visibility, you simply need more content. The reality is how the models are actually getting that narrative is they're pulling it from all of these different sources. And as long as those sources don't agree on the narrative, or in most instances, they do agree on the narrative about your brand, this is how it then drives consistency. And so to switch the narrative about your brand in AI answers, it takes more effort because the models are again pulling from many different sources. And until you get to that consistently changed narrative across that source mix, it's going to be hard to actually improve your sentiment. So this is what we also mean by optimizing across the source mix. You can always push out, more content that mentions your brand that gets picked up by the models. But if you want to change the sentiment, it's a full marketing team strategy across social media, PR, content marketing, paid media, affiliate. And these teams have not been set up in the past to actually work together. And again, this is where AI models might see different narratives. And until you have a unified front, you will not be able to move the needle.
Yeah. The sources you talked about are interesting to me because Obviously, some brands, the sources that get referenced in relation to them are maybe third-party sources, Reddit or things like that. Sometimes it's owned content. As a CMO, once I know this information, should I be trying to change which sources get referenced? Should I just be leaning into the sources that the AIs are already using in reference to me? What do I actually do when I have that data in terms of where I'm putting my focus, where I'm putting my budget as a CMO?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I mean, the first thing, like I mentioned, is realizing that it's pulling from a really fragmented ecosystem, and therefore it's not a single optimization for a single part of the source mix that's going to move the needle. It takes a unified effort, and that also has its organizational challenges. But from a pure source perspective, what it means is you are going to need a different strategy for each one of those channels. Now, there's long-term strategies and short-term strategies. In the short term, it's easier to leverage sources that are already driving the narrative. And this is where most brands are actually starting their own website. It depends at which state of this funnel, but it's something that they have more control over, and therefore they tend to lean on it. But to secure long-term performance, this is where, again, publisher strategies, editorial content, depending on the vertical, might secure more long-term performance.
Right. So, for folks who haven't gone and read the report yet, I encourage you to do it. I think it'll be in the resources tab
You
on the
should.
side of your screen. There's something in there that I found really enlightening, which is these three shifts that marketing teams need to make in terms of measuring at the audience level and the topic level, in terms of optimizing the sources that the AI is already citing, and in terms of operating as a single cross-functional team. I mean, these are the themes you've talked about a lot today as well, Charles. I'm also aware from my conversations with marketers that not everyone has the resources, the human resources, the financial resources, technological resources to focus on all of these relatively significant changes all at the same time. So, for anyone on the call today who maybe can only start with one of those three options, which one should they focus on? Which one will create the most change and the greatest positive outcomes?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm not sure that the answer is going to satisfy the audience in the sense that you should look at it at a granular level. Again, there's no such thing as a generic source mix or, hey, this is how different websites are cited across AI models. It starts within the category, it starts within the audience segments. Where we see brands focus more, and that's when we're helping them get started on their journey, is finding where there are the biggest opportunity areas where perhaps their first party content has more influence. And that's something that I do want to expand on the word that I used, influence. We do see a misconception in this space that the sources that are the most often cited end up driving the answer, and that might not be the case. So one of the unique metric that we look at in the platform to help our customers understand, well, where should I go and place that first optimization that I'm going to make? Where is that low-hanging fruit? We actually look at AI influence and AI impact. What it means is we're actually comparing the content on the websites that AI models are citing with the content inside of the AI answer. So we're doing a direct comparison to understand how much of the content from that source ended up making it inside of the AI answer. And so that gives the marketing teams that we help a lot more focus when they're trying to optimize. They're focusing on the sources that are driving the narrative, not just being mentioned by the AI models. So it's all about strategic updates. One of the other thing that we see very often is brands with more resources that are starting to optimize their strategies or that are trying to automate content generation and generating content at scale. That tends to not work really well with the models. And, some of the latest guidance from Google is starting to reflect that as well, where they've seen brands generate thousands of articles. And there's a misconception in the space that that's what it takes to move the needle. But no, you need to produce high quality content that meets the model where the model is pulling content from and that delivers on the topics that the models are prioritizing.
That's fantastic. Charles, thank you so much for a great presentation, for a great
My
conversation.
pleasure.
We are going to get to some audience questions in just a minute, but before we do that, I promised folks that we would reveal the answers to the poll that we put up earlier.
I can't wait.
And so the question again is if you could improve just one thing about how AI represents your brand, what would it be? The overwhelming winner with 59% was the respondents would show up more often. They're most concerned with visibility. 6 out of 10 respondents say that that's where they'd focus. 31%, 3 out of 10 said that they'd like to be described more accurately. And I'm a little surprised by this, but only 9%, only 1 out of 10 respondents said that their main goal would be to be described more positively. Charles, does that surprise you as well?
No, this is really the first learning block that we sort of have to take our customers on when they start their AI marketing journey is we're all coming from this world where visibility is what's going to drive a customer to picking your brand. Obviously, you need to secure visibility because otherwise you'll never be part of the conversation. But for the largest brands in the world, they might already have a lot of a brand that's very visible or products or brands in their portfolio that are already visible. But the reality is that actually driving customers or consumers to your brand? And this is where you get into accuracy and favorability is the most important drivers. If you appear, but the model is using you as an example for what's bad in the category, customers are not going to pick your brand.
Yeah, it's a great point. So thank you to everyone for taking that poll. Thanks as well to everyone who put some questions into the chat. I'm going to go through some of those right now. And let me start with this one because, Charles, we talked a little bit about how favorability is more evergreen and visibility is something that changes more often. But when we talk about this data changing more often, what are we actually talking about here? Is this something that is changing day to day, hour to hour, month to month, quarter to quarter? Um, how long does my visibility and my favorability hold steady, and how often do I need to remeasure this?
Yeah, this is a really great question. There are multiple folds and layers to it, so I'll keep it at a high level. But essentially, the models are pulling from the web. They're looking at many different sources to again drive a narrative about your brand. That source mix changes every day. So every day there are new web pages that become available. Think about a press release, think about a product launch, think about a new review, think about a new publication. And so every day, the AI models have access to more information about a category. And so what we recommend for our customers is to measure every day because every day the source mix changes and daily syndication and daily collection of data is what you need to start uncovering those early signals, both when you're trying to understand your performance, but also when you're optimizing. You've just put out that press release. Is it getting picked up by the AI models really quickly? Or was your website's content being picked up more quickly? So, really, data collection every day is the standard that brands need to be thinking about. And as they optimize, obviously, they secure long-term performance. And again, to secure that long-term performance, it means optimizing for the entire ecosystem.
And to dig a little bit further into this question around visibility versus favorability, how exactly do AI models determine what's favorable versus what is just visible? And how much, if at all, does that change or differ from one model to the next?
Yeah, this is a great question. We could have unpacked the insights even more into the report, and I love where the audience is going with the granularity. The reality is each model is going to have its own performance because it's pulling from its own source mix. So we see, for example, ChatGPT is pulling maybe more often from a Reddit or Wikipedia, which are things that are programmed into the model. But the reality is that differs, if you're looking at Google. In terms of visibility, visibility is really, am I in the answer? How crowded was the answer? I mean, there's a number of components that go into it. But the narrative is what the model appends to when it's mentioning your brand. Each model is as its own style, but we analyze it, across the models, and we essentially look at some of the keywords that the models are associating your brand with and how positive those words are or aren't. And this is how we're able to show you how positively or negatively a model is actually describing your brand.
Right. So, what happens if the teams inside your company don't actually work together? I mean, one of the points you've made a couple times now is we need to get the PR team to work with the social team, to work with the website team, and on the list goes. If they're not actually talking to each other, what's the best way to start that collaboration or make that collaboration work better? And at the end of the day, does one of them actually own this versus any of the others?
Yeah, this is a great question that even the most mature brands haven't fully answered yet. Again, this is sort of something that came on top of everyone's 9 to 5, and therefore it requires a lot of change management. This is something that we help our customers a lot with. We have a dedicated consulting team and arm within our company with experts in change management, organizational structure, enterprise design to actually help those teams connect. The reality is, it's not going to prevent you from optimizing if all your teams are not working together. It's just going to make it harder. If your social media team is posting about your product, saying it's known for quality, and then your PR team is posting about a new launch and saying, hey, it's known for speed, these are inconsistent narratives that are going to make it hard for the AI model to actually pick you for one or the other because it's not getting the same type of information. So it just makes it harder. The reality is, you need a tool that actually gives every team the right intelligence. And so right now, every team is sort of using what they might have already, but they're not necessarily using a tool that unifies them. This is what the Bluefish platform achieves for a lot of our customers. We have a lot of features that are designed around that change management, where we're unifying all those teams in one place and allowing them to take action across a unique goal or a common goal that they're setting to make sure that they all have visibility into the work that's happening across these different teams.
Right. Um, so I'm curious because if I happen to compete with one of the brands that you talked about today, or that you talk about in that report that folks can download, then I happen to know exactly how my competitors are doing. I can benchmark against them. But for folks who maybe aren't in those categories, have a different list of key competitors, is it possible for them to benchmark against their category as a whole, against individual competitors within that category? How do they do that?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. Again, the report is meant to provide the early insights, answer some of the early questions that CMOs get and sort of get stuck on, like I need to know how my brand is doing, as if it was the whole journey. The reality is when we engage with our customers, it's a fully customized program. Again, there's no such thing as generic performance. And so while these are good representations of what's happening in the category overall, unless that performance is measured against the customer segments that you are tracking, against the services or products that you are offering, you should take it directionally.
Right. So one thing that I found really fascinating was you pointed out that the sources that are being visibly referenced in an AI response are not necessarily the ones that are making sure you show up in the first place. How do you guys actually see which sources AI is using to decide whether to talk about my brand, and how can I as a marketer, as a CMO, uh, figure that out for myself and try to target some of those sort of hidden sources?
Yeah, this is a great question. There are multiple layers to it, but it sort of revolves around content gap analysis. How can I understand the gaps in my content and how to close them? The reality is it starts by, as you mentioned it, detecting the sources that are actually driving the answer. I think one of the best example here is Wikipedia. ChatGPT cites Wikipedia pretty systematically, and this is most likely to get accurate information about a brand. But it might only pick up the brand's name, the founding date, the amount of employees, some very official information. But Wikipedia is not going to contain any opinionated information about your brand. And so the reality is you might see that domain being cited frequently, but it doesn't drive the answer. And this is where, again, like I mentioned, AI impact and AI influence that we measure, where we're doing a direct comparison of the content on the web page with the content inside of an AI answer, allows us to understand, oh, the model pulled from that source for these specific pieces of content that ended up going into the answer. And because those are actually covering the topics that the model prioritizes, it allows you to understand influential content frameworks. And this is where you can start understanding, well, is the model favoring content that is more recent? Is the model favoring content that covers specific topics? And leverage those frameworks in your own content. So again, within the Bluefish platform, we have an unmatched level of insights and depth of insights, especially about your website, to help you understand how far you are from matching what the model is looking for, or how your content is resonating or not resonating with the model. And most of our customers are looking at this again at an audience level, at a category level, to understand how they should be making changes, high quality changes, strategic changes to the content on their first party websites.
All right. I know there's a vibrant chat happening over on the side right now, and a lot of the conversation is pretty granular as it tends to be with optimization and
Which is great.
things like this. But one of the questions that we saw come through and that I think is relevant given that conversation is this. Can you actually spend a moment just talking about the methodology that you're using and where your data is coming from when you build these dashboards, when you build these models?
Yeah, this is a really great question. Um, One of the biggest thing in this sort of early industry is that the models are actually not releasing any information about what people are searching for. And that is a big shift from an established industry, such as like traditional search. And a lot of the brands sort of left trying to understand, well, what should I be tracking? How should I be thinking about my performance? And our methodology relies on full customization. So again, there's no such thing as a generic insight or a generic recommendation or optimization. And so we start by understanding what is core to your business. Data that you get that doesn't actually answer questions for the business is just more noise. And so we use many different inputs that are grounded in search data, search demand. That can come from the brand, that can come from official channels to actually figure out the scope. What is the frame that we're tracking? So think of it as the category. The next thing is understanding how the model is actually talking about your brand. So we have unique proprietary insights that allow us to understand, again, what are the key topics that this new brand ambassador is considering? And then finally, audience segments. This is how our customers are able to build the biggest competitive advantage in this AI channel. The better you are at understanding your customers, the better you can understand how the model talks to your customers, and the better your optimizations are going to be for those customers. And then we have a proprietary model that will actually generate prompts that are representative of what consumers are experiencing in the AI channel. And we send those prompts to AI models every day. So we're essentially reverse engineering how consumers and AI models are evaluating your brand in the AI channel. And without that kind of control, you're not going to be able to get the necessary granularity to actually make those optimizations. But also for really large enterprise brands that need to go through compliance, using data that was collected in privacy breaching ways or invasive ways is not an option. And therefore, they rely on that kind of customization, transparency, and control to get to that level of intelligence and then optimize for their AI performance.
All right. Charles, I'd love to keep talking to you forever and happily could, but unfortunately, we need to wrap it up in a moment. Let me just finish with this one overarching question. If you had 90 days and one person on your team to improve how your brand appears in AI, what's the first thing that you would do?
This is a great question. And this is because We get it from every CMO or marketing team that we're talking to. Obviously, this is a really important and crucial topic right now. And so everyone is sort of operating on that quarter basis. What can I do in this quarter? Well, if you can run as fast as Bluefish can in 90 days, you can do a lot. And the first thing is establishing a baseline. So understanding how is your brand being portrayed to your customers across the products and services that you care about. Once you have the necessary level of intelligence and a statistically significant level of intelligence, you can then start to make strategic optimizations. Now, this is where most brands, again, we only work with the largest brands in the world, will have more trouble in performing optimizations in a 90-day time frame. But if you are able to make those changes, the AI models tend to pick them up fairly quickly. And so you can spend, month number 2 or 30 to 60 into making those changes and then measuring after those changes. One of the really key thing we haven't talked about again is how do we tie the effectiveness of our optimizations back to AI performance or real downstream impact? Are we lifting revenue? Are we driving more traffic to our brand? Are we improving our AI performance? That can all happen in the 90-day time frame as long as your organization is able to move the needle on those optimizations.
All right. Well, Charles, thank you again for a fantastic presentation, for answering not just my questions, but a lot of great questions from our audience as well. I really appreciate it. And before we wrap up for the day, I just want to let everyone know what's coming up next at eMarketer. So please go ahead and mark your calendars for our next in-person event. It's the Future of Digital Summit. It's going to be happening on Tuesday, September 15th at City Winery in New York. You can join eMarketer for a full day of content where our top analysts and me, as well as brand leaders from around the industry, will dive into what's happening next in terms of AI-driven discovery, CTV, commerce media, and so much more. To secure your spot, register for more webinars like this one, and to preview our full 2026 summit lineup, you can go to emarketer.com. For more eMarketer content, subscribe to our newsletters and check out our podcasts, which of course can be found wherever you find your fine podcasts. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks so much again to Charles, the team at Bluefish. Thank you to the great eMarketer studio team behind the curtains. And thanks to everyone who helped make this webinar possible. We'll see you all again soon on the next Tech Talk.